Rots and Gits, I present to you the absolute worst freaking map in all of Games Workshop. We are continuing our tutorials on how we actually deploy on all of the Games Workshop spreads. There's been a little bit of delay because I've had other things I've had to do, but we are back at it with Games Workshop 3. Now, this is, in my opinion, the dumbest layout that Games Workshop has. Well, half. The other layout's pretty good. It's only recommended on two different types of deployment, and that's going to be your sweeping engagement and on your search and destroy. When it comes to search and destroy, I will admit that your JW3 is actually a perfectly fine and acceptable layout, but on specifically sweeping engagement, this is a nightmare, and hopefully you never have to run it at a tournament because it is dumb. And if you're a TO out there and you are utilizing this, you just really enjoy torturing your players, and that is shocking to me. Anyway, let's get on to how the heck we're going to deploy on Games Workshop 3. There's a lot of lines here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my current Wrath of the Rock list in order to actually make these deployments, because I think that's probably just, I don't know, it's the army I like. It's the army I'm excited about right now. So that's what I'm going to be using for my deployment. We've got, turn 1 deep striking Terminators. We've got some tanks. We've got infantry, and some lone ups. So it's a pretty good representation of what most armies are really going to have. If you are deploying on this map, the thing you got to realize is you're not hiding if you're anywhere convenient. The only real places that you're hiding is behind this ruin and behind this ruin. There's really nowhere else. So if you can kind of see these two thin lines, if your opponent is drawing from their deployment zone, they can only draw this line, but your standard battle tank moves 10 inches, which means they're getting to here, so they can take this line, which means you're not safe behind this ruin with anything, unless you're maybe a lone up. There is very little distance between the deployment zones, so with a 16-inch deployment, distance between deployment zones, if you have an opponent who happens to be really ballsy and just put some melee units right here and wants to just go forward turn 1, they could just wreck your entire army because it's very, very close deployment zones. It's actually even closer than search and destroy. Of course, if they go second, they basically just lose. But if they go first, you can get destroyed. So this is one of those terrain layouts that I think really, really, really is going to punish going first, going second. And as you can see, there's just line of sight everywhere. So they can see from their deployment zone all through here. They can see there's even a thin line right here from this angle through here, which is kind of ridiculous. So people can be seen from this angle. Obviously, this angle is super easy to see. All of this is completely exposed. All of this is completely exposed from this angle and this angle. The only places on this map that's safe is here and here. That really sucks. So the key, if you have to deploy on this map, is you really, really want to make sure that you're faking your opponent out and you are deploying your valuable stuff last. Do not deploy your valuable stuff first. You have to try to out-deploy your opponent. So on this map, if I had to deploy, I would probably have as much stuff in reserves as I generally could. So I have my Terminators. I'm gonna have my Inceptors in reserves. My Azrael crew is, in all reality, going to have to hang out. Man, this is tough. So basically, one Lancer is going to have to deploy here, and another Lancer is going to have to deploy here, and then we're also going to have an Impulsor that's probably going to deploy here. Now, just in my army, the Impulsor actually does have a scout move, so it is a reasonable thing to deploy an Impulsor right here. It doesn't actually just get shot if it goes first, because I'll just scout to be here. But even here, you got to be careful. You got to draw these lines. 10 inches, the standard battle tank move. They actually could catch my Impulsor, so you have to make sure that you are angling this correctly. So let's just draw this line for ourselves as well. 10 inches for is standard battle tank. Obviously, if you're playing in something like Gladius, where you can get advanced and shoot, or Firestorm, not Firestorm. Yeah, Firestorm would do it. Bringers of Flame, Sisters of Battle would also be able to do it. You would have to draw an even more extreme line. And here, you're also at risk to your Lancer. This is just one of the worst deployments I could actually possibly imagine having to play on. Yeah, because you can't put 2 Lancers here. So, oh, this is absolutely brutal for deployment. So basically, you're just going to do the best you can. You're going to have to accept that something is going to be exposed. Beyond that, you can't deploy safely here, because if you deploy here, they can move their 10 inches up and blast anything in this ruin. So lone ops are a key. So if you do have this in your mission pack, you got to bring some lone ops, man. And lone ops actually would give you a very, very good advantage on this map as well. So for example, if I put the lion here, my opponent's not really going to be able to get within 12 inches, even though they're going to get line of sight. So I can have the combi lieutenant and I can have the lion just kind of hanging out perfectly safe on this flank. I can have a scouting Impulsor ready to get to their natural expansion turn 1. My normal Desolation Marines, I love them, so they're probably going to be hanging out back here. JPI maybe. Honestly, these guys might be in reserves as well. If you're, or they could be running here. Scouts. Typically, you really like scouts to hang out roughly here and then scout behind cover, but there's nothing safe about standing here with scouts. So perhaps on this map, you actually just put scouts at your natural expansion, which means I would maybe put my lone ops on this side. Because if your scouts start here, they can scout fairly safely to here behind this line I drew, right? So this is probably not a bad place for scouts to deploy. And cursors are inside the transport. And Azrael and crew. Damn, I'm not actually entirely sure how to do this. Perhaps they actually have to go here so that they can hop in their impulsor after it moves. Something like this. Which does leave them open to getting shot from this line. That's really, really tricky. So this is actually one of the worst deployments I think I could imagine. So hopefully your deployment just doesn't, your tournament pack just does not have this as part of their deployment, part of their pack, because there's literally nowhere to hide. You're basically just that you go first on this map. And if you don't believe me, try to draw these lines yourself and try to hide it. So this is trash. So let's get on to something that's actually more useful. Let's talk about the search and destroy deployment, which is a very, very reasonable deployment, which does give you options regardless of whether you go first or second. So I'm going to go ahead and load that map in now. Let's go to search and destroy. Here we are. And I'm just going to do a magical deletion of the lines. Boom. All right. So now we're on to a much more reasonable and rational deployment that we could take. This deployment, exact same army, exact same everything else, but completely different results. I'm going to take these Desolation Marines. I'm going to shove them on my home field, and they're going to hang out here all game long. And they're just going to hang out behind this thing, obviously behind cover, maybe even stringing a little bit with the Vanguard launcher because the Vanguard launcher has 48 inches instead of 36. And so he's screening your backfield, and then these guys are just kind of doing whatever they are doing with their 36-inch guns. Then I'm going to have a Lancer who's probably going to be hanging out back here. I'm going to have a Impulsor who's going to be hanging out right here. I'm going to have maybe Azrael and crew hanging out in the front, right in front of the Desolation Marines. Because on this particular army, what I do is I scout my Impulsor. I let the Incursors out, and I immediately jump Azrael in. That way, I do, in fact, get my turn 1 CP. Another actually reasonable place for them is right here. This is also a very reasonable place, because your opponent will not be able to see them if you deploy them right here. So actually, maybe we'll go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and put them on over here. This does make them more or less invisible to your opponent, assuming they don't have any crazy movement shenanigans to turn 1. So we basically will just pop them behind that. And you could finagle with it as you so please. Scouting Impulsor right here. Incursors can hop out right there. You can move the Impulsors with its 6-inch scout. Incursors go straight to the middle. Advance Azrael squad to hop into the Impulsor and move the Impulsor where you need to move. Another place for this to be could be right here. Either way, do whatever makes you happy. This is also actually a very interesting place for the Impulsor because while it looks like you could be shot, you could always just scout it forward and then not be shot. So that is also a very rational and reasonable place to put your Impulsor for your deployment. You always, on this map, you're going to want your infiltrators to grab the center, just in case you're playing against an army that wants to be scouting into the center. So scouts are, of course, the best thing in the world about this. And they would just obviously hop right behind if you go second. And if they go first, they can even just come forward and move block the crap out of your opponent turn 1. Or they just run away, either way. Or they score you area denial, blah, blah, blah. Lancers are probably both going to start behind this line. However you want to finagle that to be so. This is just the safest place for them on this map. If you are running like a orc truck, a lot of times maybe you can fit a truck right here. I'm not entirely sure. This would once again also be a very good place for an Impulsor because an Impulsor could start here and it could scout forward. So this is also not a bad place for an Impulsor to go. So if you're running multiple transports or any type of transport that is either shorter or has the ability to scout, these are great locations for them. I like it. And obviously, this is also a great place to start because, especially if you're playing like an advance and charge army, if you just start here, you could get out 3 inches for free and then do your advance, which in advance would be like on average like a 9-inch move. So you're going like 12 inches on average, and then you're basically in your opponent's deployment zone turn 1. So if you're playing like a big melee army that wants to get in really fast, this is actually a really good place to deploy. So these are places where you could do your transports. These are places for your shooting support. And then everything else is basically just going to be flavor. If you're running lone ops like this, I might just start the lion here because he's going to be teleporting anyway. I might have my combi lieutenant up here to score me, early secure no man's land, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And if I get to do a turn 1 deep strike, I would put my terminators down here. It's possible that I also would have my JPI deployed roughly here. So all these are very good places to deploy. You can't be shot from any one of them. You have the scout moves. Like, you could be shot from here, obviously, but you have the scout moves to protect you, right? You could be shot from here right now, but you could also have the scout moves to protect you. If you don't have scout moves because you don't have units that scout inside of them, then you probably can't deploy in these two places. That's just the way it is. So on a map like this, what you've done is you've basically established the fact that, okay, you are more or less safe. Your opponent, if they have something nasty that's shooting here, they can move on average 10 inches, and they can draw this line. But remember, this is under the idea that you have a scout move on your dedicated transports, which means you're going to go here. And if you're something like an orc truck, which is just shorter than this, you would be safe with a standard 10-inch move anyway. So measure your vehicles, check those line of sight, and then you're going to be perfectly safely deployed. You'll be in position to go and grab your opponent's natural. You'll be in position to grab your natural. You'll be in position to avoid any of those unsightly shooting angles that your opponent might be able to grab. The thing I always use as a rule of thumb is I always use a standard battle tank's movement of 10 inches, which is the standard movement for battle tanks to see if they can get lines of sight. There are times when this changes, so if you're playing against an Imperial Guard, remember they can give a move order to get their battle tanks a movement of 13. If you're playing against Gladius or Bringer of Flame, they can do advances in shooting, which can change things. Tau have different ranges, so it can always change, but your standard battle tank is going to move 10 inches and shoot. So keep that in mind. That's a good rule of thumb when you're measuring these lines, and always measure these lines because that's going to tell you what and where you can do your deployments. So with that, guys, this is basically GW3. If you're deploying on this map, this is your staging point because this is where you're going to be sending your melee from. This is a staging point because this is where you're going to be sending your melee from. Beyond that, guys, that's basically it. You're trying to get here, and you're trying to avoid getting blasted turn 1. This is perfectly acceptable on search and destroy. It's a little challenging with some of these angles, so you really have to make choices about whether or not you actually want to deploy here. And if you have scouts, it makes it a lot easier, or if you have shorter transports, it makes it a lot easier. If you are naked infantry on just by yourselves, you're perfectly fine to deploy here. Yeah, I like search and destroy, and I hate sweeping engagement. On sweeping engagement, it's like probably the worst deployment in the game. But here, it's pretty acceptable. So, GW3. Hope this helps. Make sure you measure your lines. Make sure you know where you can move. Turn 1. Always important to measure how far it takes you to get to your objectives. For example, if I wanted to get a secure no man's land here turn 1, or if I wanted to cleanse this objective turn 1 and I don't have a combi lieutenant, I do know that a standard 3-inch disembark with a standard 6-inch movement will get me to this objective, cleansing it turn 1. Or I would just do it with the transport itself. So, always pre-measure, lines of sight, movement, you'll be good to go. This has been GW3. Hope you all have a great freaking day. Crump on. Bye-bye.